Chapter 5, Duncan's Son, Blitz Disciple Vargas. The moon was at its highest as the three young fighters continued at a steady pace south. The danger had long since passed, and Tara had finally began to feel relaxed with her two comrades. She felt that she knew their true intentions now. They were not for the Empire, who obviously wanted them dead. But Kefka sent those soldiers after me too. Tara thought. He knew I was with them, and yet, he tried to finish me off as well. If I were a part of the Empire, then why would he want to hurt me? This is confusing.
This is great!
Locke exclaimed, interrupting her thoughts.
Those people were from the Empire, right?
Tara asked, just to make sure.
Because... Now... I'm scared.
Edgar smiled a little and looked to Tara.
Tara, there is someone I'd like you to meet,
he said.
We're members of the Returners.
Locke began to explain, but Edgar interrupted him.
Our mentor, Bannon, would certainly like to meet you.
Edgar gushed excitedly.
Magic is going to be the key to winning this war. Magic?
Tara trailed off.
Tara, you have magical powers,
Locke said.
And... Arvis told me that it was almost like the Esper in Narsh had some sort of reaction to you. You were the only soldier left in the mine shaft out of the three that went in. Could there be a connection? I haven't the foggiest,
Tara replied.
It just seems natural to me that I have the use of this power. But no human is born with the powers you seem to have and...
Edgar suddenly stopped when Tara tugged on the reins of her chocobo, jerking it to an immediate stop. Her heart felt as if someone had frozen it over. Locke shot Edgar a look, and they both walked their chocobos over to Tara.
I apologize,
Edgar said softly. Tara looked at him and shook her head.
Thank you. But it is not only that,
she said.
What should I do? I'm sure the Empire is going to come after you. If they get their hands on you again, the world's finished. Tara, you want to understand your own powers, right?
Edgar chose his words carefully, and Tara nodded.
Then I think we need to consult with Bannon,
Edgar concluded. Tara sighed. Like she had any choice? Where else would she go? There was no doubt in her mind now that going back to the Empire would just be plain dangerous. Perhaps this Bannon person could tell her something she could use to the advantage of gaining some insight into her own life. She looked at Edgar and nodded slightly.
Okay,
Edgar exclaimed.
There is a cave to the south that leads to South Figaro. We can rest there and prepare for the trip to the Returners' hideout,
Locke said.
It's a pretty long journey. I'll feel up for anything as long as I can rest up for it.
Tara smiled.
Let's go.
About a half an hour later, which was filled with small talk and deeper introductions, the party reached Figaro Cave. Stationed outside the front entrance was a Figaro soldier with a chocobo, who immediately saluted Edgar as he rode up to him.
King Edgar!
The soldier exclaimed.
Where are you headed at this time of night? Through the cave, eastward to South Figaro,
Edgar replied, as he hopped off his chocobo.
We'll have to leave our chocobos here, you guys. They won't be able to travel through the cave without getting hurt or left behind eventually.
Edgar then turned to the soldier.
Return to the castle, and tell the others we are safe. Yes, sir. Take care.
The soldier exclaimed, jumping on his own chocobo. He whistled, and the other chocobos that had come with Tara, Locke, and Edgar followed him as well, and soon, they were out of sight. Edgar looked to Locke and Tara and smiled.
I'll lead,
he said.
It's not every day I get to leave the castle and explore like this. It's exciting.
The trek through the cave was quick and harmless. Any monsters that had been hiding in the cave were sleeping for the night, so no one was attacked. However, their only setback was at the entrance, where Locke had noticed something strange about the walls in the first part of the cave.
They look like that they have been pulled apart and then put back together,
he commented casually as he narrowed his eyes and ran his fingers down the walls.
That's impossible, Locke. You can't tear apart a cave wall like that,
Edgar said, and laughed.
And even if you did, you would need a ton of machinery to put it back together. I'm just commenting,
Locke exclaimed, eyeing the wall suspiciously.
Besides, what do you know, Edgar? You said yourself you don't get out much. Be quiet,
Edgar said, and Tara giggled. The team eventually exited the cave, and walked down a faded dirt path the Edgar said he was sure would lead south. However, before they got to South Figaro, they came across a small house which had a small garden out front and a drinking water well. Edgar blinked and stopped, taking a deep breath.
What's that smell?
He asked.
Are you so tired, you're hallucinating?
Locke asked.
I don't smell anything. Well, I sort of do,
Tara said.
And I am a little hungry. Can we go inside and ask them for something to eat? It's in the middle of the night,
Locke exclaimed, but it was too late. Edgar and Tara had walked up to the door, and knocked. However, no one answered. Edgar knocked again, but still, there was no answer.
Let's just go in,
Edgar said, and Locke shook his head. Edgar was so naive. You couldn't just walk into someone's home. Edgar opened the door, but the whole group was surprised to see that there were lights on in the home, with no one there. A bed had been messily made, steaming tea was resting on a stove that it had been recently been made on, and a china cabinet had been left open. Edgar turned to the bouquet of flowers that was set on a table and lifted them, inhaling deeply.
So this is what I smelled.
He trailed off. The flowers were a beautiful blue color. He set them down and said under his breath they were his favorite. Tara walked up to the stove and looked at the teapot.
This smells like green tea,
she said.
That was his favorite too,
Edgar said softly. Locke asked, but Edgar ignored him and walked over to the china cabinet, closing it and latching it shut.
These? His favorite dishes.
Edgar smiled, and Tara and Locke looked at each other.
I think we should just spend the night here,
Edgar said.
We can go to South Figaro tomorrow. If you say so,
Locke said, not bothering to argue.
I want to sleep in the bed,
Tara exclaimed, and leaped in the messy bed. Locke yawned and stretched, getting down onto the floor. Edgar did as well. Inside, he was secretly hoping that the owner of this home would come back. There was something he wanted to see. However, morning came, and no one had returned to the home. The group ended up sleeping in until noon, when Tara rose and awoke everyone with a fresh cup of green tea that she had made herself. Making sure to leave the house as they had found it, the party then left, only to see an old man outside by the well, drinking from a bucket of fresh water he had drawn.
What they?
Edgar trailed off, and the old man looked at them. Edgar cleared his throat.
You know this guy?
He said this as he jerked a thumb back towards the house. The man nodded.
Of course. He left a couple of days ago after he heard Master Duncan was slain. He headed into the mountains. I heard Duncan's son, Vargas, is missing as well. I have a bad feeling about this.
The man hitched the backpack he had on his shoulders up higher and waved, walking off.
Master Duncan?
Tara questioned.
I've heard of him,
Locke said.
He's famous for a form of martial arts that I heard can only be learned by the purest of heart. He has a son named Vargas, who is also training with him. I guess the guy that lives here also trains under Duncan.
Oh, Tara said.
Well, let's go. I am eager to see South Figaro. I'll be right with you guys, I'm just going to get some water,
Edgar said. Locke took Tara away from the house and further down the dirt path, but Edgar, instead of getting the water, gazed at the blue blossoms that were out in the garden.
Sabin? Was he here?
Edgar asked himself. Turning to leave, he then ran and caught up with Locke and Tara. South Figaro was a bustling port town, and because it was noon, almost everyone was out either shopping or on their lunch break from work. Merchants streamed the town, all shouting to advertise their wares and stopping mothers on the street with their children to show off new toys and gadgets. Seagulls swarmed the air from the port and landed on the streets, trying to snatch up food from the fish markets or from little kids' hands.
Oh wow!
Tara exclaimed.
What a wonderful city! It's so busy and bursting with activity. Yes. It is great here, isn't it?
Edgar asked happily.
I hardly ever get to come here, and when I do, I am usually escorted with guards and I don't go many places. Well, I've been here plenty of times,
Locke said, and put his hand over his forehead to shield his eyes from the sun.
I'm starved,
Edgar exclaimed.
Do you know any good places to eat, Locke? I sure do,
Locke exclaimed.
Follow me. There is a small cafe around here somewhere that has the best antlion steak ever.
Tara and Edgar excitedly followed Locke, and they soon entered a cafe that was next door to the inn, and it was full of people and kids that were running about and settling down to eat. There was one empty table left, and Locke dashed to get it before anyone else could. Edgar took his time and pulled out a chair for Tara, receiving a grateful smile from her as a thanks. When all three of them were seated, Locke picked up a menu and began to show Tara some things she might enjoy. Locke laughed as Tara decided that she would order almost one of everything on one side of the menu. She had a big appetite for such a petite lady, and reminded him so much of an innocent child. Minutes later, the waitress came, and took everyone's orders. As she walked away, Edgar looked up and happened to notice a strange sight at the bar across from their table. It was a tall, built-up man dressed in all black, sipping down a mug of beer. Even his face was hidden by a black mask. Beside him, sitting as still as a statue, was a black Doberman dog that was full-grown.
"Oh, I'll be right back,"
Locke said quickly, and stood up. Edgar raised his eyebrows.
"I'm going up to the bar to get our waitress. I think I forgot to tell her that I wanted water with my meal." "All right,"
Tara replied. Locke left the table, walking up to the bar. The waitress behind it turned and smiled, and they engaged in small conversation. She noted Locke's additional order, and Locke was about to sit down, when he noticed the man in black staring right at him. Locke put on a smile and raised a hand.
"Good afternoon, sir,"
Locke said friendlily, but the man remained silent. He looked away from Locke and back to his drink. Locke furrowed his brow and crossed his arms over his chest. Edgar gasped and stood up immediately.
"Edgar, where are you going?"
Tara cried.
"I'm dragging Locke away from his new friend before he gets his throat slit,"
Edgar said, and Tara blinked confusedly. Edgar marched up to Locke and took his arm as Locke began to speak again.
"At the very least, you could give me a response?"
Locke muttered, and Edgar yanked him away.
"Stand back!"
Edgar hissed, and Locke looked at the king in surprise.
"Wha?"
Locke asked.
"The guy was being rude to me. He seems vaguely familiar,"
Edgar whispered, and pulled Locke back to the table, forcing him down in his seat. Tara looked back at the man in black and then turned to Edgar. He had her full attention.
"That's Shadow,"
Edgar said in a hushed whisper over the table.
"He's an assassin, and he's slit his mama's throat for a GP any day."
Locke and Tara both got twin looks of shock on their face, and didn't bother to turn to look at the man in black again.
"Better steer clear of him, I guess."
Locke trailed off. However, right then, the waitress returned with everybody's orders, and soon thoughts of Shadow had been abandoned by all and replaced by overwhelming hunger. After their lunch, the party spent another hour strolling through town and stopping at the local shops to pick up supplies and to upgrade weapons. Soon, they were on their way out of South Figaro and to the nearest mountain path that would take them to the returners' HQ, Mount Caltz. Tara cleared her throat and Locke and Edgar turned to her as they began to climb their way up on the rocky path.
"Tara?"
Locke asked.
"I don't know,"
Tara said, and looked about them. The path they were taking was occasionally clustered with grass patches or rocks, and it was slowly ascending higher. Other cliffs could be seen in the distance, but they weren't high or dangerous. Tara gasped as a black shadow suddenly leaped at her left. She looked around, but couldn't see a thing.
"Feels like someone is following us,"
Tara said, and bit her lip.
"You're probably just paranoid because of that shadow story I told you,"
Edgar said, and laughed. Tara gasped again and clutched her hands together.
"What if it is Shadow?"
she cried, and began to run further up the path.
"Let's hurry up." "Wait up!"
Locke called, and soon, he and Edgar were both chasing after the emerald-haired girl, and both having an equally hard time catching up to her. Tara soon passed through a small cave, and was out of sight. Locke panted for breath and stopped to rest in front of the entrance of the cave before proceeding. Edgar stopped beside him and wiped his brow.
"She looks frail, but—"
Edgar began to joke, when suddenly, a scream rang throughout the air, causing the mountain cockatrice monsters that were perched on the edge of some of the cliffs to take off flying. Locke and Edgar looked at each other.
Tara!
The two took off running through the cave at lightning speed, and when they emerged, were encountered with a sight neither was expecting. Tara was lying on the ground, trying to push herself back up. Standing over her was a tall, tanned man that was built up with so many muscles, that was all he seemed to be made of. His dark hair was pulled into a small ponytail at the top of his head, and loose locks of hair whipped around in the mountain wind. His white pants were torn and dirty in several spots, and his chest gleamed with sweat in the sunlight. He turned his glare over to Locke and Edgar, who looked puny compared to him, and smirked.
"What did you do to Tara?"
Edgar demanded, and Tara finally stood up, limping her way over to Locke's side. She was still in shock from being so suddenly attacked by the man. All she had done was emerge from the cave, when blinding winds came at her and paralyzed her in place. It was then that the man appeared, and grabbed her, shoving her down.
"So, Sabin sent you, eh?"
he had shouted to her. Tara's eyes glazed over in memory of that name. Sabin was Edgar's twin brother. Did the man see Edgar with Tara on the mountain path and mistake him for Sabin? She brought a hand to her head as the man now shouted that same question to Locke and Edgar.
"So, Sabin sent you?"
he demanded. Edgar blinked and Locke held on to Tara.
"Who are you?"
Locke demanded, but Edgar also spoke.
"Sabin?"
Edgar asked worriedly.
"Is he here?" "I am Vargas, the son of the great Blitzmaster Duncan,"
the tanned man exclaimed, followed by deep laughter.
"You were the one shadowing us earlier,"
Locke cried.
"So Tara was right. We were being followed." "Brilliant!"
Vargas exclaimed, and smiled slyly.
"And how unlucky it is that you have run into me."
With that, Vargas charged at the party, bringing his hands together and shouting a few words.
"Purity Drive!"
he shouted, and he was suddenly covered in a white light that blinded everyone. Tara, Locke, and Edgar all felt, however, the hard blows that were dealt to each of them as Vargas plowed through, knocking them all to the ground breathless. Tara, being beaten down for the second time now, cried out the loudest in pain, now too weak to even draw a sword to defend herself. Locke and Edgar both staggered to their feet, and glared at Vargas as he laughed loudly, now standing by the mouth of the cave.
"Is this the true power of a blitz?"
Locke moaned as he held his badly bruised arm.
"Enough!"
Vargas exclaimed, and brought his hands together, preparing another attack.
"Of with you now." "Why are you attacking us?"
Tara panted, lifting her head. Vargas smirked, but before he could answer.
"Give it up, Vargas!"
A strong and deep voice suddenly called out from behind the party. With a swift leap, the voice's owner did a powerful flip, landing in between Vargas and the others. He stood tall, his big hands set on his hips as the small blonde ponytail his hair was set in brushed gently back and forth across the back of his neck. His body, also bound with muscles, was much more toned and built nicer than Vargas. The royal blue muscle shirt he was wearing actually resembled the colors that Edgar was wearing. The man dug his brown boots into the ground, and Vargas snickered.
"Is that you, Sabin?"
Vargas asked. Edgar, Locke, and Tara all looked to each other, shock set in their facial features. Prince Sabin, King Edgar's long-lost brother. 6. Prince of Figaro, Blitzmaster Sabin. Chapter end.